حضورنا الكريم، جلستنا القادمة ستقدم باللغة الإنجليزية. The coming session will be in English. سيستفيد كل من المعلمين والطلبة من التطور المستمر للبيانات وتحليلها وكيفية الاستفادة منها وأثرها على القرارات الخاصة بالتعليم وتقييمه. والآن أدعوكم للانضمام إلى جلستنا الحوارية الآتية، والتي يديرها الدكتور أيهم الفيومي من PwC الشرق الأوسط، وعنوانها توظيف البيانات من أجل تطوير التعليم.
Thank you, Ms. Rula and panelists for an insightful session. Dear attendees, our next session will be in English. Both teachers and students stand to benefit from the continuing evolution of data and analytics. To learn how to harness the power of data and its impact on education and decisions, join our next discussion panel moderated by Dr. Ayham Fayyoumi from PwC Middle East in the session entitled Data-Driven for Education Transformation. Welcome, Dr. Ayham.
Welcome everyone. Thank you. So we'll be discussing an interesting topic today with distinguished experts from different organizations around the world. So allow me to introduce our speakers. We have with us Mr. Agustin Porres. Mr. Agustin is an education and public policy professional with successful achievements in education and development of innovative solutions for education challenges. He is a Latin American Regional Director at Varkey Foundation. With us also is Dr. Margaret Clark. Dr. Margaret is a Senior Education Specialist at the World Bank. She leads the World Bank work on learning and skills assessment and works with countries around the world to strengthen the education systems, focusing on particularly 21st century skills and learning competencies, student assessment and vocational training. With us as well, Dr. Maciej Jakubowski. Dr. Maciej is an advisor and a university professor and researcher in economics of education, teaching and other areas at Warsaw School University. And he is a former deputy minister for national education in Poland, where he was responsible mainly on focusing on school funding, teacher policy, and international cooperation. With us as well is Dr. Ahmed Dewidar. Dr. Ahmed is a professor and international development expert in education research, project design, strategic planning, and monitoring and evaluation. He worked with several universities and international organizations, and he's currently the expert team leader of the European Union Technical Assessment for Quality Education. Welcome, everyone. We will start with a few questions to our panelists today, but please, all attendees, you are welcome to post your questions, and we'll do my best to pick some towards the end of the session. So allow me to start with you, Mr. Agustin. When we talk about data-driven education, many things come to mind. So how do you see it? What do we mean by data-driven education?
Yeah, thank you very much for the invitation and for the conversation for this amazing forum. It's great to be here with all of you today. I think data-driven it's something that in the classrooms it's quite present, but the challenge is to include it on a school level and make our schools and our education systems more accountable. So in each of the classrooms, teachers are measuring what they are doing. Maybe they are not sharing that data enough, or maybe we don't have all the tools that we can to make a better use of that. But the starting point is good because we have data in the classrooms, and we can improve that in so many levels. Many other industries are data-driven. They make decisions based on data. In education, we have a challenge. I will say, with all respect, our narratives, when we explain, we use a few numbers, but we make long stories. And the challenge is how we bring more numbers in our explanation, how we make ourselves, and I say like from this social organization, but from ministries and from school as well, how we use data and we share that data in order to make sure that we are improving constantly. And this, we have to see this as an opportunity. And in many ways, something that will be very beneficial, not only for teachers, but for school principals and for schools communities.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Agustin. In fact, data is key for making decisions at multiple levels. So especially when we respond to a global crisis and for even long-term planning. Allow me to maybe jump to Dr. Marguerite. How do you see the importance of data-based actions and decisions at a macro level? So looking at the education ecosystem in general.
Thank you very much for that question, and thanks for the opportunity to be here. Well, at the World Bank, we work with a lot of countries and we have this global perspective. So it's really important for us to understand at a macro level what's happening in each of these systems and how we can best support countries. I think the way that I would think about the role of macro data and database actions falls into three buckets. The first would be the critical importance of macro level data for helping us understand and respond effectively to global crises or shocks that affect education ecosystems. And of course, the most recent one was COVID-19 pandemic and how that affected education ecosystems. But of course, it could be climate change, it could be conflict or violence. There are many different kinds of crises or shocks. I think from our experience in terms of COVID-19, what we saw was a critical need for macro level data to help countries and development partners like the bank understand what was happening in the midst of the crisis. What exactly was happening? Where was the crisis hitting most negatively? So the bank actually teamed up with UNICEF and UNESCO to do a global survey of education systems around the world at multiple points during the COVID crisis to understand the extent to which schools were being shut down, the extent to which children were being required to engage in remote learning. And that gave us a sense of the scale of the crisis and gave countries an idea of where they stood compared to others. For example, while the average number of days that schools were closed globally was 141, South Asia and South America were way above that. In South Asia, the average number of days closed was 273. In South America, it was 225. That compared to the global average of 141. So we could already see, even in the midst of the crisis, that there was likely more of a looming issue in those regions because of the extent of school closure and the effect on children. Also then coming out of the crisis, we saw the critical need for macro level data to help systems understand where they were at. Now we've come through 2 years of COVID, what do learning levels look like? And many countries, including India and Ghana, Nigeria, and many in South America, did national assessments or large-scale assessments trying to understand where are learning levels at. That data was critical to help inform actions because what you saw was that learning losses were huge, that often the number of months that children were out of school equated to the number of months of lost learning. It was almost 1 for 1. And you also saw that it wasn't just lost learning, it was foregone learning. So children had forgotten. If a child was in grade 2 when COVID started and they're coming back in grade 4, they've forgotten a lot of what they were taught in grade 2, in addition to foregoing what they should have covered in grades 3 and 4. So this macro level data was critical to helping inform countries' approaches to instruction in the classroom. You can't just start with a grade 4 curriculum for a grade 2 child. You have to start employing different strategies to get that child up to speed again. And this also helps inform how the bank has worked with countries to help them reach those goals with their children. So that's the first bucket of trying to understand a crisis when it's happening and then respond effectively. I think the second bucket is the critical importance of macro level data for helping all countries monitor and ensure their progress towards global goals like the Sustainable Development Goal for education. This was in place prior to COVID-19. It does represent a bigger learning crisis, but macro level data are absolutely critical to help countries know where they're at in relation to, in particular, SDG 4.1.1, which is the learning goal that asks countries to report on the % of their students who are reaching at least minimum proficiency in reading and math at 3 points in schooling, grades 2 or 3, end of primary and end of lower secondary. In order to do this, countries have to report either data from their national assessments or international assessments. Otherwise, you don't know if you're making progress. I think one of the great things that has come about because of SDG 4 and the learning indicator in particular is that it's got more countries thinking about what does it mean to meet minimum proficiency, and is my minimum proficiency the same as yours? So it's creating an opening for global proficiency frameworks and more common ways of understanding what do we mean by minimum proficiency in this global perspective. So that's the second bucket. And I think the third bucket is just the general utility of macro level data to help countries understand or benchmark where they're at in terms of their learning goals, but also inform the kind of policies they need to put in place to help them get where they want to go. And that's the kind of data you get from regular national large-scale assessments or international assessments, and countries doing that over time so they get trend data. And doing this so that they start understanding correlates of achievement. What policy factors like class size or teacher training are related to learning outcomes in my system? And what does that look like when I look at what other countries are doing? And that, of course, is a value of PISA, TIMSS, PIRLS, and those international assessments that allow you not just to look at the macro data in your system, but also others. So I think those are the three buckets I would phrase or think about macro level data and its utility in. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That's a very comprehensive, elaboration of the importance of data at a macro level. But allow me to zoom in into, the micro level and with Dr. Machi. So within schools, where and how do you see data being used and leveraged?
Mm-hmm. Thank you for this question. I think I will, the most important use of data is data, the results of assessments of student achievement. And this is what Margaret was talking about. And I think similarly, as you use it at the macro level, you can use it much more effectively at the school level, at the classroom level. And starting even with international assessments, this is something which was, it's done mostly at the country level, it's discussed with experts, with the World Bank, with ministers. But if you go to schools, they don't know much about it. And this is something, for example, we want to change, and we use our platform to provide school level assessments for schools with the results reported on the scale of the PISA study. So schools can learn where they are, and that's the first use of data, to know where you are and where you are going, right? Even comparing to other countries, but if that is not available, then comparing to other schools or maybe to some standards you have in the curriculum. That's very important. But then assessments, formative assessments, and providing feedback, these are key ingredients of effective teaching, right? So you cannot really teach effectively if you are not every day, you are not monitoring student results, and you are not providing constructive feedback based on actual data, based on what students in your classroom can actually do. In many countries, teachers just follow curriculum, then don't really check whether students are following them and the curriculum and just moving forward. And students are very easily left behind, because if they don't grasp something at grade 3, they will not learn much at grade 4 and so on. So monitoring that is very effective. Also, assessments are part of effective teaching in the sense of using evidence-based methods like retrieval and space practice, checking and deepening student understanding, and again, providing informative feedback. The problem is we discussed that for many years already, but it's very difficult to implement that in the classroom. And now we can also use technology to support teachers, providing these tools to teachers which are easier to use, and train them how to do that effectively. An important part of that, we are talking about, schools, but an important part of data is also to provide, data and results to students and to teach them how to use this data. This is what students don't know how to do. we have a nice word for that, metacognition. So learning how to learn, but the main part of metacognition is to learn that you can monitor your own learning and you can learn from the results of, for example, assessment, what you don't know, and then how you look for information. This is something which students are not very good at, and this is something which should improve next years. And also assessment can be, or other tools for diagnostic purposes are very important. You know, to diagnose learning difficulties very early as possible, and to address them. You know, the best countries, the best education system, they monitor this in very early, even in preschool, and in the moment they see some students are struggling with reading or other issues, they support them. And the same is with teachers and schools. And here I would more say to, you know, about mistakes we are doing. We very often focus on using data for, you know, grading, for selection, for accountability. But, you know, like punishing someone and saying you are not very good or you are, you know, worse than others will not improve anything. This is, you know, okay, this is maybe a first step, but then you should focus more on supporting students or teachers or schools. You know, so these data are very useful, but if some support, some help for those who are struggling follows that. And last but not least, I was talking mainly about achievement, but if you look at, you know, data, they can be also very useful to understand what are student preferences and to improve their well-being. This is something what we work over last 10 years, that you can measure quite reliably what students want in a school, how they want to change learning, how they want, you know, to learn. And by small changes in a school, adapting to student preferences, you can improve their well-being, and you can also make teaching easier. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Machi. And basically, we all agree that data is important at different levels. But despite the importance of data and its impact, basically, there are some concerns. Dr. Ahmed,
Yes.
if you allow me to jump to you, what can go wrong? I mean, what would happen if we don't rely on data? Or what, even worse, what would happen if we rely on unreliable data?
Okay, thank you very much. Good evening, everybody, and it's my pleasure to be with you. I'm sending everybody my respect, appreciation, and best wishes to all my colleagues and teachers everywhere. This is a very big question, because if we don't rely on data, what can go wrong? Everything can go wrong. And sometimes even when we depend on data that is not valid and reliable, still things will go wrong, because we're not making sound decisions, because sound decisions depend on sound information. And it's not only sound information and enough sound information to make the right decisions. So the decision-making process actually should always depend on valid and reliable data. If we think about the theme is we would like to transform our schools to the future, how the future would look. We don't know how the future will look like. And the last 2 or 3 years taught us lots about, you know, any kind of prediction about the future. However, we keep trying to work with whatever we have from information. But for example, if we would like to assess the current situation in our schools, what kind of quality of education we're providing, we would like to assess the situation. And in this case, we have to be very specific about our purpose, the methodology, the tools we're going to use. And before we use the tools, we have to establish evidence of the validity and reliability of our tools. And I remind myself and everybody that validity means it's the accuracy, the appropriateness, and the soundness with which the results are interpreted. So it involves not only the tools, it's all how also you interpret at the end. When we talk about quality of education, some people just minimize it to the passing rate. And we know sometimes it depends on what kind of quality of exams have been used for achievement, and it depends on how well trained the teachers are in setting their own achievement exams. But if we go back to measuring quality of education provided in any system, it's much more than simply the assessment at the end of the academic year. It's the teaching and learning that's happening at the school. It's the curriculum. It's the well-being. It's the facility. It's the use of resources. It's the environment. So many variables that either have to be defined from the very beginning, and then as a construct, for validation, and then they are very well represented in each and every tool that we're using. As a teacher at heart, and this is something I'm very proud of, I always would like to use examples. And I have an example from one country that is using, several countries actually, that are using some of the questionnaires that they use for the students in order to assess students and teachers. I'm bringing from both, from students and teachers that they use in order to assess the students' perception of the quality in the classroom. And I'm going to give you one statement, or one of the items that is used for the questionnaire. It says for the students, I myself do not want to become a teacher. And the student is supposed to choose between strongly agree, agree, disagree, strongly disagree. And this, I have multiple issues with an item like this, because the item assumes that in order for a particular system to be successful, all the students would like to be teachers. If you try to generalize from there, it means after 5 to 10 years, we'll only have teachers. If this is really a key to success, we don't have doctors, we don't have nurses, we don't have mechanics, we don't have IT people. The assumption is your education system is successful if everybody loves their teachers to the extent they only would like to be teachers. Another thing, which I do when it comes to interpretation, this is not actually in reality the real thing. You'd like to help people to think, discover their strength is, what would they like to be? They would be able to change even their plans. So the item itself is not valid for any interpretation related to the quality of education. However, another issue with the item is a student, 4th grade, 5th grade would like to answer a question like this. If somebody wants to become a teacher, he will have to use double negative in order to be able to say, yes, I would like to be a teacher. So I myself don't want to be a teacher. If I want to be a teacher, I have to say strongly disagree or disagree, which is something that is, I watched this in implementation. It was very difficult for the students. That's why their answers did not really represent what they really thought, because many of, in Arabic, the word la is only 2 letters. And usually students tend to what? Kind of omit it and don't see it. So they read the item as positive, whereas it is negative. And now you have data that is not reliable. When you do the analysis, you get the scores, you have the means, and then you build decisions based on this. This is one example. Another example, it says, I participate in assessing my and my peers' performance during class. There are 2 issues here. I can do you're asking for 2 things in one item. Assessing my and my peers. So there could be cases, someone that has the opportunity to assess his or her own performance, but not peers. Or someone else has peers, but not their own assessment. Or someone else, none of them at all. So you will also, again, have multiple answers according to it's very ambiguous. So whatever you're going to get from this item is not going to be valid. Another issue was the translation of the word peers. It was translated in Arabic into al-aqran. And after the implementation of the survey was complete, I asked the whole 30 students who were in front of me, do you know what al-aqran means? None of them actually. But however, they answered the question. For the teachers, and I only have one item from the teacher because I'm aware about time, I wish I had the time to go into deeper discussions with my students. Okay, so is this positive or negative? Means I don't, I'm very, very busy. I wish I had the time, but I don't. I asked several teachers to say, oh, no, maybe it's time management issue. Or they are overwhelmed with the task, so they cannot actually do any kind of implementation or taking things further. So if a teacher says, I agree, it means I wish I had the time, or I agree that I don't have the time. And if somebody disagrees, does this mean that it's not a good teacher? Because maybe I don't want to do this, I have to do something else. Lots of items like this. At the end of the day, by the way, the findings of the survey for the teacher and the students were the 2 findings that did not correlate with the overall quality. So we go back to, if we really want to really collect data to depend on, to use for decisions, we have to make sure that it's accurate, it is reliable, it can be really used for decision making. In each and every decision we're making, we have to be able we have to be responsible for the interpretation of the findings and accountable to them. Thank you very much.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Ahmed. And staying on data, of course, when looking at the quality of data, we need to look closely at the sources of the data and the systems in use. I would like maybe to go back to Dr. Machi. Within the education institutions, what are the main sources of data, and like what systems and tools are required to ensure, the organization of the institution is digitally enabled as an institution?
Thank you for this question. I think it's a little bit, I have to admit, it's if you look at school systems with, the data collection systems on which I also work internationally and nationally, it's, I have to admit they are a little bit outdated. I mean, we are still collecting data from schools, putting a lot of efforts and spending a lot of money on conducting large-scale studies, collecting this data from schools. It doesn't work that well, especially now with COVID. We had a lot of problems. We have to postpone international assessment and things like that. And I think it's really time for most countries to implement digital platforms to collect this data and to monitor this data, even like constantly. There is no issue from a technological point of view, even in countries when you have like problems with internet or numbers of computers at school. These are not things which are barriers which are that difficult to pass. But if you look at the system level, the most important thing is to have a digital ID framework. That's my experience. So if you have a framework when you can identify all students and teachers, you can connect different data, then you can do amazing things. You can monitor students passing from one school to another, how they progress in the system. It really gives you a lot of information at the system level without, and then you don't have to do all these costly and not reliable studies. And obviously you can do that if you have that, you can create easily a platform for online data collection. It's all a little bit of burden, especially for teachers and schools when you start, because you have to put all this data, but with time, it's really not that much, really, it will not take that much time from schools. And it's pretty surprising that it works, but in only a few countries still. And second, again, I will talk about assessment data and achievement. This is really, the most important information, because we can collect hundreds of numbers, but the most important information is what students know and can do at the end. This is the purpose, this is the goal of schools, right? To teach them, I don't know, mathematics and science and other subjects. So we have to monitor that. And here the problem is that schools use a lot of assessments, but usually they are not standardized, they are not high quality. And again, with digital tools, it's pretty straightforward to provide schools with standard assessment. This is what we do. Like I said, we even provide schools with a tool when they can measure achievement on a PISA scale and compare to other countries. But the most important is that these assessments are standardized, they're reliable, and that they show you where you are in relation to curriculum. And here, again, to be able to do that, you not only need a reliable, assessment and digital platforms to do that, or the way to do that on paper, but you need also curriculum, which specifies measurable, expectation, achievement goals. And many curricula in many countries, they don't really do that, in a way that you can easily measure against this goal. And I think in the future, we can collect this data constantly. And it's not about, like spying and monitoring every student and, but it's more about learning and providing feedback to teachers, also using digital tools, which is very easy to grasp, which is very easy to use. Because if you do all these studies and you collect all this data, at the end, you waste a lot of time. And this time is not spent and invested in learning. So that is something which I think should change. Thank you.
Very important point. I do believe that digital tools can eliminate many of the human errors, also automate data collection, cleansing, and analysis as well. Especially if, as you mentioned, we need to, for teachers to focus on what matters the most. And talking about teachers, Dr. Agustin, the Varkey Foundation is committed to empowering teachers. From one side, how do you see, the role of data in empowering teachers? And from the other side, what capabilities teachers will require for, a better data-driven education ecosystem?
Yeah, Thank you for the question, and you will have a big challenge on putting all these ideas together because we are talking of so many levels, but I totally agree with it has been said before, and I like the approaches. Let me share 3 ideas quickly. The first one is not specifically on teachers, but will help me get there. There is a government in Argentina, one province, the province of Mendoza, that I would say is one of, in Argentina, is working a lot with data more than others. And a quick example, they are measuring the ability to read on kids on grade 3rd and 4th. And of course, that data helps them a lot to take decisions. One decision is that after comparing the students and the classrooms and the different locations of the schools, they are able to understand where there is a family issue on their reading skills and where a child is behind the classroom. They can start working with their brothers and sisters that are younger, age 3, 4, 5, to take the problem much before it gets to the age of 10. That is where the World Bank is measuring, and it's a very helpful measure to compare. So that data is not only helping us to help those students, but also to predict problems. And we know that any intervention that we do early in the career is cheaper and more effective than what we do before. So those are the benefits that we need to see on the system. Because I will say the second issue is about trust. Why we are not as data-driven as we want to be. There is an issue on trust that teachers don't trust enough in governments, government don't trust enough in teachers. All of them want their own data collection to be made by themselves. We don't share data because we are afraid that we are going to be evaluated and maybe dismissed. And so we need to see these kind of examples, the one I mentioned in Mendoza, to build trust and understand that this is mutually beneficial for everyone, for the kids, first of all, but then for teachers and from the system. And if we trust to each other, we will be able to get a much better use of data. Lastly, and to answer the question, which capabilities on teachers, we are working on a project with teachers in Latin America. It's a character development project. And we are teaching the teachers how to use data, how to do classroom evaluation in order to produce impact evaluation results from the exercise on the classroom and to share those practices in order to be scalable for all teachers in the region at least. So the challenge there on teachers, of course, we are training them not only on character development, plus evaluation tools, how to measure, what indicators could work. And that is something that is not actually on the professional development opportunities for teachers. Is the question, I would say, yes, we need to include these tools into the training, but also we need to put together the academic resources and academics approach with classrooms approach. Sometimes many experts are doing evaluation that is not getting into the classroom. We need to build that bridge, and it's also about trust, but we need to build the bridge between the academics and teachers in the classroom to enrich each other. Teachers to be more open to evaluation, to investigation, and to share the data, and academics to understand better what is happening in the classroom. If we put that together, we're going to be much better than what we are today. And I will say it's one of the things that we need to work hard because we are behind to other industries or to other sectors. So talking about this today, it's a great opportunity, and I hope that we can put this into practice more and more.
Thank you, Dr. Agustin. Trust, and of course, teachers are required to learn new skills, new digital skills, especially with growth and growing adoption of digital and blended learning models and so on. Allow me to maybe jump to Dr. Marguerite and ask, what sort of educational policies, especially the ones related to data, that governments can focus on to enable, schools' transformation in general?
So, I mean, I think when I think about that question, it would be about the role of the digital and hybrid learning opportunities and connected to data and the kind of policies related to that. I think for our perspective working with low and middle income countries at the bank, what we saw during COVID was that moving to remote and distance learning, having more of these online environments was not necessarily a good thing for these countries. And while there's a promise in technology and digital environments, if they're not done effectively, they can actually increase the divide and the equity gap between different student groups. So I think what we've learned in terms of leveraging digital and hybrid environments and using them to transform schools is that technology only plays a supporting role, and you cannot replace schools and teachers. Technology makes teachers more effective, but it will never replace them. Education is fundamentally a human endeavor. And all of the platforms and things we're talking about can't take the place of the human beings in the system. I think what we also saw during COVID was that there's a critical need for infrastructure. If technology and digital and hybrid learning models are to help improve learning for all, you have to have the infrastructure in place. And I think COVID demonstrated that that isn't the case in most education systems. So there's a lot of work still to be done. I think what we've also seen is that as you move towards more of these hybrid models and digital models, that the role of parents as a learning partner is becoming more and more important. Parents played a key role during COVID, both helping children access the hybrid and remote learning on offer and help them understand it, but also as partners with teachers and others in the process. So I think in terms of how the bank thinks about this and how I think about it as someone who's worked not just at the bank, but as a teacher, is that if you want technology and the data and the learning opportunities that come from these technology-based systems to help transform education in schools, that policies need to be broader. And I think there's 6 areas where this needs to happen. I think countries need to have a national vision for education, a national education policy or something that spells out the broader goals for what they want students to achieve and situates technology, data, digital environments within that broader policy. It has to be an enabler. That's the first bucket, having that broader policy. I think the second thing is building out the technology ecosystem in terms of both connectivity, ensuring connectivity within and outside of schools for all kinds of students and all kinds of schools, but ensuring that there are actually resources, there are digital and hybrid learning resources available for students. I think a third bucket of policies is having policies around teachers and teacher professional development. Teachers aren't necessarily digital natives, their students are. So I think teachers need more support in terms of professional development, learning how to work with digital platforms and tools, but also how to understand and use the data emerging from them. I think another bucket of policies is around parents and communities, understanding how to leverage parents as knowledge partners and teaching partners, but ensuring that parents have materials at home. I think there's another bucket of policies around safety and inclusion. When children are in these online learning environments and accessing information, it can be risky. It can expose children to bullying, misinformation and hate. So I think there needs to be a lot of focus on there to ensure it's a safe environment for children. And finally, I think, you know, this world of digital and hybrid environments requires new policies around assessment, particularly high stakes examinations and testing. One thing we saw during COVID was that the traditional examination model in a lot of countries was thrown out the window. No longer is, is the sitting in an exam hall, writing a paper, kind exam paper, going to necessarily be the way of the future. Countries had to move more towards how can we draw on teachers' knowledge and evidence of student learning, creating calculated grades or accredited grades as a supplement or substitute for the traditional exam. Are there ways that we can now use the data generated through these online hybrid digital environments to create more of an ongoing collection of evidence on student learning and find ways to make that valid and reliable enough to make these kind of decisions about students instead of going back to the traditional standardized external exam that happens at one point of time, sitting in an exam hall somewhere.
Thank you, Dr. Marguerite. No, I appreciate it. I mean, I like the point around, having a national vision for education. We're seeing countries in the region, in the Middle East in particular, developing a national digital education vision, but not focusing on completely replacing teachers, obviously, but blending and mixing education using and utilizing digital tools within schools in the right way. Dr. Ahmed, so what's the impact of, and seeing this movement, especially after COVID, like what's the impact of digitalization? And I want to differentiate between digitization and digitalization on schools, on the educational institutions. What kind of considerations for educational institutions?
Okay, I would be very quick in answering because of watching for the time.
In 1 minute.
What actually concerns me most is equality. Equality in terms of access to the infrastructure by all students in order to be able to enjoy whatever kind of teaching, learning through the system, the assessment system. There are lots of challenges when it comes to the assessment, because the biggest challenge is actually as to what extent it's that, I'll have to say that's a lot of cheating happened when there was the exams were only on. I myself, for my graduate students, I had only a small number. I had to create an exam for each and every one in my class, 15 different exams, so that they don't extend their interpersonal cooperation through one question. So it's the equality, access to infrastructure. The other day we were evaluating a TNA results, and there was only one area of the 16 areas being assessed that had 40% contribution simply because they had access, whereas others, many of the were underrepresented because they do not have access to a stable, reliable, quick enough internet connection in order to help them to respond. It is 7 and I have to stop because of time.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Really, thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Agustin, Dr. Marguerite, Dr. Machi, and Dr. Ahmed for your contributions today. Very interesting and exciting. Thank you very much for your time. And thank you very much, all attendees. Back to the team and QRTA.